Okay, in the last section, we covered how to make multiples pretty easily using blend, using intertwine, and using some of the default transform tools to make things happen. We also looked at doing some other distortions using different tools. So some pretty cool stuff. What we're going to look at now is how to make a pattern, like a patterned fill, for an object, and we can make our own custom patterns. The way that we can do things manually is let's go ahead and we're going to delete that object. We're going to be using some artwork and making some artwork to make a pattern. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the paintbrush tool. And I'm going to go to my brushes menu over here on the side. If that's not visible for whatever reason, right, you can go up to window and you can go down to brushes or hit F5 on the keyboard and bring that up. And I'm going to go to my libraries. And I don't know which ones I have that you may not have. These Wacom 6D brushes, I don't think are standard. I don't remember. But basically just choose something. It doesn't really matter what. I'm going to say artistic paintbrush, and that will pop up this other window. Now I have all these choices of brushes. And so I'm going to go ahead and start just making some brush strokes, right? With the idea that maybe this will become a pattern that I'm going to want to have repeat as the fill of an object, right? And so again, I'm just sort of randomly putting these pieces together. Now I could do this with multiple colors. So let's go ahead and I'm just going to change the brush type and change the color to something that's not, I don't know, maybe a light orange, who knows? It doesn't really matter because, right, this is just going to be ugly. But so, right, so I've got this, and this is like the most beautiful thing I've ever made. I want this to be a pattern. So what I need to do to make this a pattern is, it's pretty simple. I'm going to go ahead and select this. And once I've selected all of that stuff that I want to be the pattern, I'm going to go to my object menu. And I'm going to go down and say pattern and make. Now it's going to say, right, this new pattern has been added to the swatches panel. And it says any changes made while in pattern editing will be applied to the swatch upon exit. Okay, great. Now there's a bunch of things that happened on screen when we entered this. First, there's all the pattern options, which we're going to get into in a second. Second, there's this, we're sort of in a special isolation mode within this new pattern, which has several options. We can either cancel what we've done, we can just say done and it'll update the pattern, or we can save a copy. So if we were to say, do something in here and then make a major change, but we wanted it to be a different version of the same pattern, you just hit save a copy. And if we just want to pop right back out, we can click here and just jump out of this area. Now let's look at some of the pattern options. So first, we can name this pattern whatever we want to name it. I'm going to leave it as new pattern. And then we have this option of grid or brick by row, which essentially offsets each copy of the pattern. We also have brick by column, which is the same but vertical. And then we have hex by column and hex by row. And again, it's slightly different ways of how these intersect. If we do, let's do brick by row to start with. And I want you to note all the patterns are not connected, right? They're very much distinct from each other at this point. So what we're going to do is let's change our width and height. I'm going to go ahead and make this like 800 by 800 or something. Let's just say 800. Oh, let's go a little bit smaller than that. Let's go to 700 because I actually want these to overlap some. Let's just do 500. Okay, so you can see this is starting to make more of a constant pattern, and I'll do 500 here as well. Right? So now I've got this pretty busy pattern, and I want you to note that even though the background is currently white, the background is actually transparent, right? Only the artwork that I've made and not the artboard is going to be bounded by this. Now, you can also change how this overlaps. In this case, it doesn't matter because, right, we don't really care, but I do want you to see that I can switch this, and you'll note that, right, some of the artwork comes on top of the other. And this would be good if I had solids with fills that I wanted to layer in a certain way. But with this, it's, just sort of chaotic, so it doesn't really matter. And I can also do, say, front to back or back to front. This copies 3 by 3. Basically, you can adjust the number of copies so you get some sense of the pattern as a whole. But 3x3 works pretty well too. And then the reason they're less vibrant is they're just meant to be dimmed, so it's a little bit easier to see, what the original artwork is versus the other artwork, the copies. Okay, so let's say we are happy with this. We're just going to click done. And once we do that, if we go ahead and create another shape and go to our fill, I want you to note that under the fill, there's this new pattern that's available. And I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And now, right, that pattern that I've created, I'm going to zoom back out, is the fill for this object, right? So that's really simple. Now, there's certain things, again, it'll give you errors if you try and use artwork that doesn't, that you can't use in a pattern. So for instance, let's say I wanted to create a circle down here, but let's say I wanted a gradient fill in there. Let's see if that'll work. All right, so I've got a gradient fill. I have this object selected. I'm going to go to Object. I'm going to go down to Pattern. I'm going to say Make. And it says, okay, it's been added. Let's see if gradients will work without any issue. And so what I'm going to do is, again, let's make this like 300 by 300. And you can kind of see, I actually like that orange edge on there. It's kind of nice. And now we can, let's see here. Let's see if we can select the individual objects. Something you can do, right, is with the artwork in here, I can make changes. So I could go to my gradient here. Oops, I turned that into, I'm going to cancel that. I could select my gradient tool here. There we go. And instead of say black, maybe I want this to be like a purple or something like that. Sure. So you can make changes to the artwork while you're working on the project, right? I could adjust scale here. There's all sorts of things I can do. I can actually bring new elements in if I wanted, to do some sort of brush stroke on top of these things, right? I can bring that in as an element as well. It doesn't really matter. So now if I go ahead and say done with this, right, what it's going to do is it's going to give me this error. It says the pattern contains an active content, symbols, effects, plugins, groups, etc. That must be expanded in order to create a swatch. If you edit the pattern again later, the expanded content will no longer be active. And so what that means is active content would be like this gradient is active content. And what it's going to do in this case is it would rasterize it, which means it's going to make it like an image file that's part of this pattern. And so that just means that I couldn't come back in here and change this from purple to green or yellow or pink or whatever. It's going to be basically stuck that way. So that's just something to be very cautious of, right? It'll lock that. And expanding things just means that because it's like an active thing, like I could use a blend in here, like we learned early in that previous tutorial, but then it would expand it into all of those shapes and everything. So it's no longer an active object. I hope that that makes sense. It took me forever to figure out what was okay and what wasn't okay. All right. So now, if I go, I'm going to hit done and I'm going to hit OK so that it's actually there. And now if I was to say, go down here and select any of these objects, I now have this other pattern I can apply. And I've got this nice, pink scalloped looking thing. Okay. So that is how you create patterns. Now, the other part of this tutorial that I haven't really mentioned yet is we're going to be creating brushes as well, because it's really awesome to be able to create your own brushes. And very much like making a pattern, it's a simple operation that doesn't require a whole lot of work. So again, brushes, transparency is fine for brushes, but it wants solid shapes. It does not want, it doesn't want gradients and things like that to be used. And when you go to do this, it's going to tell you very bluntly that you can't do what you want to do. So let's go ahead and start making some brushes. So I'm going to start by just making a simple rectangle. And let's go ahead and give it a fill color. We'll make it blue, and we'll give it this, let's give it a stroke color that's a little bit maybe green, and make that stroke heavier in weight. And we're just going to start with something that's really basic, right? So this is just a very basic shape. Now I want to turn this into a brush. So to make this into a brush, what I need to do is I click on my brushes window. I have that brought up. And then I can just take this artwork, or let's actually copy this. So if I hold down Option, click and drag, I can create a copy pretty quickly. And I'm just going to change the scale on this a little bit. And then I'm going to hold down Option, click and drag, and create another one, drag it over there. So I'm going to select all 3 of these pieces of artwork. I'm going to go ahead and just drag this up into this window, and you'll see a plus sign forms. Now, if I let go, it's going to ask me what type of brush I want to create. And so a scatter brush is going to be like some of these up here, the square brushes. The art brush are these long stroke-like brushes. And then pattern brushes are the brushes down here. And we're not going to be making a pattern brush today. We're just going to be working with scatter and art. So I'm going to start by making this a scatter brush. I'm going to hit OK. And I want you to note there's all of these different options. Colorization method right now, we're not going to have any. It's just going to be always teal and green. But I want you to note that there's all of these settings we can adjust. We're going to leave them all at the default for now. I'm going to hit OK. And then I'm going to go ahead and use my paintbrush. I'm going to make sure I have this selected. And as soon as I do that, you can kind of see what happens. I'm going to undo that. I'm going to click and drag up here. And you'll see I get 1 copy. Let's go ahead and see if I can get multiples, right? So I'm getting these multiple copies along the path. Now, if I want to change my settings, I just come up here and I double click on scatter brush. And let's say instead of spacing being fixed, well, I'll leave it fixed, but I'm going to make it a lot smaller. And what that means is it's going to copy more copies closer together. So if I'm going to say leave strokes, just so you can see the difference. And so now you can see, right, I'm getting a lot more copies on top of each other. This is another way we can really quickly create like duplication of options. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and delete some of these strokes because it's filling up the entire artboard and background area. And let's go ahead and look at some of the other settings. So first, one of the ones that's really useful is scatter. If we change this to random, and I want you to note there's all these options if you have a drawing tablet that you can use, but we're just going to say random. Now random, if it's just set 0 to 0, it's not going to do anything. We need to give it a little bit of range. So I'm going to pull this down to -83 and +58. Sure. I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to say leave strokes, and I'm going to use my paintbrush. I'm going to click and drag. And you can see if I go in a straight line, it's actually, right, sending some of them down below the line and some of them up above the line. Now, that's a pretty massive amount of randomness. So let's just do like 20%, or actually, let's say that's -20. And let's do +20 for this one. Right? Because this is essentially, we're trying to go below and above our center line. So I'm going to hit OK. Sure, I'll apply that to the strokes. And you can see that tightens everything up a little bit. If I come up here and I just draw a straight line, you can see I'm getting more variation there. Now, one of the other things we can do is rotation. Just go ahead and say random on that. And we'll just say, let's just say -15 degrees and +15 degrees for this, because we don't want it to go so crazy. And we're going to say apply to strokes. And you can kind of see already what's happening there. We're getting, again, something a little bit more varied. So you can get the sense, right? We have all of these different options we can change. If I randomize the size and go down a tiny bit and up a tiny, well, that's a lot bit, but we'll see what happens there. Sure, I'm going to apply it to the strokes. And again, you can see now I'm getting even more variety in these things that I'm making. So that's pretty awesome, right? And that's the power of a scatter brush. Now, when you make a brush in Illustrator, something to note is that it's only within the project that you're currently working on. So you can go down to your brushes menu and you can say save brushes. And it will allow you to save all the brushes you have in here, including the new ones that you've created. And then you can load those brushes into other projects. But let's just say we're going to be working on this brush right now. So let's go ahead and create something that we want to have stretched along a distance. And so one of the tools we haven't looked at yet is the width profile tool. or the width tool is what they're calling it now. So I'm going to start by just creating a line segment. I'm going to click and drag, and this line segment has like not a whole lot going on for it right now, but let's go ahead and increase our stroke weight to, oh, I don't know, 20. Let's do 40 points. And then what I would like to do is change my color to black for now. And we're going to zoom in a little bit so we can see what we're doing. And then we're going to use this thing. It looks kind of like a flower to me. So this is going to allow us to change the width of our stroke. And so what we can do, it's basically doing this action, but it allows us to make our own custom profiles. So if I click here and drag, it's going to add a point, and it's going to suddenly make this much thicker in one area than another. Now I can go ahead and I can actually, create like a lot of wiggle in here, and really make different points. Now, if I hover over the point that I've created, I can click and drag to push it closer to others. So if we wanted like a harder edge between the things, we can get that. And yeah, so just go ahead and keep making yourself something interesting here until you're happy with that shape. And maybe I'm going to taper this down to 0-ish down there. But ooh, I actually like that little little dot at the end. And what I might do is say on my stroke, change this so that the ends are rounded, right? So it gives me that little teardrop at the end. All right, so I've got this stroke, and I might want to up that thickness a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and use my selection tool. I'm going to click, I'm going to drag this, drop it in here. And instead of doing a scatter brush, I'm going to choose an art brush. I'm going to hit OK. And when I do that, you'll see that it gives me this preview here. And there's some default settings that we're going to leave. But what it shows is like, this is the direction the brush stroke's going to go in. So if I hit OK, and I go and grab my paintbrush tool, and before I should just be able to click and drag, right? And now you can see that that artwork that I made is being pulled along as a brush stroke. And right now the default is it's being stretched along the length of the stroke. Now there's other ways that I can get this to work. So if I double click on this and I say scale proportionally, what that's going to do, if I hit OK and say I'm going to apply to the strokes, is it's going to mean that if I make a short stroke, it's going to be really small. If I make a longer stroke, it's going to be bigger. And if I make a really long stroke, it's going to be a massive, massive stroke. I'm going to undo that last one. Okay, and so the width can be fixed. Note that I can also, if I have a drawing tablet, I can change to pressure or stylus wheel or tilt or whatever to adjust the width. I can't randomize the width. And then there's this stretch between guides, and you can basically give it a certain length that it's supposed to be. I'm not super worried about that one. We can go ahead and leave the strokes we've got there. Right. But if I apply this, it's still kind of doing the same thing. It doesn't really make that much of a difference in at least for what I'm working on. Okay. So we're going to say, let's go back to scale proportionately. One of the other things is the direction. So if I do this, that means that it's going to essentially draw the opposite direction. So if I say leave strokes, right, it was starting with the fat part of the artwork and going to the thin. Now it should start with the thin. Oh, it's actually doing the opposite of what I thought it was going to do. Maybe I'm backwards in my thinking. But whatever the case, let's see if we can get that to. Oh, maybe I actually need, that's weird. Why did it not do this? It should be, let's try, click preview and hit OK. Let's see if this works. Oh, okay. Let's say apply to strokes. So I think what it did is yeah, there we go. So now it's working the way I thought it would. All right, so it's starting with that thin part, going to the thick part. What it did is it created a new copy, and I was still on the old copy of the brush when I was trying to edit it. Okay. So colorization method is the next thing. You can also do it right against the grain. If we go ahead and hit that, I'm just going to say apply to strokes. You're going to see that, right, it did something horrible. If I I don't know which stroke this even is. I'm going to go ahead and undo that. Um, but so, right, so that made like a nightmare. Basically, it draws this sideways and it smears it that direction. It's really strange. But you can do some other flipping things. So I can, right, this is pretty uniform on both sides. But I could flip it up or flip it down, flip it upside down. Nothing too exciting there. I'm going to, the last thing is the colorization method. Right now it's set to none, which means that I can click on here and I could choose a different color for it to be linked to maybe, but for some reason it only lets me do it in the artwork there. So let's change this to tints and hit OK and just say apply to strokes. Basically what this would allow me to do is draw a brush stroke, but if I go here, I don't think it'll change the full color, right? You can see, oh, let me select the stroke that I just made. And let's see here if it changes, right? So now it is actually changing the color, right? With my changes here, right? If you have colorization set to none, it's not going to do any colorizing. I do want you to note that it will not do gradients this way. Okay, so we looked at none and we looked at tints, right, which allows us to change these colors. There is this little tips option here, which is going to show us what these colorization methods do, right? Because it's so none, right? It's just going to whatever color it's what it's showing you is right your current stroke color, nothing changes. Tints are going to adjust the entire tint of the object based on your current stroke. Tints and shades will do a better job. And then hue shift, it looks like you can actually, make other changes. And so it really depends on the artwork that you're using for your brush stroke. Right? In our case, because it's just a single color, most of these methods don't really matter. We're just going to cancel all of that. Okay. All right. So that's how you make brushes in Illustrator, which is pretty great to be able to make these custom brushes. All right, so this is how to make patterns, your own custom patterns and your own custom brush strokes in Illustrator.